First puzzle, threats in puzzle position are: rook takes pawn, rook takes queen, bishop takes pawn, rook takes rook, king takes pawn. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Rook to a1, check. The best move in puzzle position is rook to a1, check. King to g2. Rook takes queen. Another puzzle. The threats are rook takes knight, queen takes rook, bishop takes pawn, bishop takes knight, knight takes pawn. Here are the checks. Knight to e2, check. Answer to this puzzle is bishop takes knight, rook takes rook, bishop takes bishop, knight to c6, rook takes pawn. Let us go to the next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Rook takes rook, check. Bishop takes rook. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Rook takes rook, check. The best move in puzzle position is bishop takes rook. Let's see the next puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Bishop takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes knight, check. Queen takes bishop. The checks are queen takes pawn, check. Queen to g1, check. Queen to f1, check. Queen takes knight, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Queen takes bishop. Rook to b1. Queen to e2. Queen takes queen. Bishop takes queen. Let's see the next puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are knight takes bishop. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. Here are checks in puzzle position. Knight to e7, check. Knight to h6, check. The puzzle is solved using knight to e7, check. Bishop takes knight. Queen takes pawn, checkmate. Next, here are the threats. Knight takes knight. Bishop takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Queen takes knight. Bishop takes knight. Checks in this position are bishop to b5, check. The best move in puzzle position is queen takes knight. Knight takes pawn, check. Bishop takes knight. Let's see the next puzzle. Here are the threats. There are no threats in this position. Checks in puzzle position are f4, check. Answer to this puzzle is bishop to d5, f5, check. King to g5. One more. Here are threats in puzzle position. Queen takes knight. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes bishop, check. Queen takes rook, check. Rook takes pawn. Rook takes bishop, check. The checks are queen to g3, check. Queen to f2, check. Queen to g1, check. Queen takes bishop, check. Queen takes rook, check. Rook to g1, check. Rook takes bishop, check. The puzzle is solved using queen to f2, check. King to d1. Rook to g1, check. Rook takes rook. Queen takes rook, check. Bishop to f1. Queen takes bishop, checkmate. Next puzzle. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are knight takes pawn. Queen takes knight. Queen takes pawn. Checks in this position are rook to h1, check. Queen to g2, check. Queen to h1, check. The best move in puzzle position is rook to h1, check. King to f2. Rook to h2, check. King to e1. Queen to a5, check. Before. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn, check. King to d8. Let's see the next puzzle. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are rook takes knight. Bishop takes knight. Rook takes rook. Rook takes pawn. The checks are rook to d1, check. The best move in puzzle position is rook takes knight. Pawn takes rook. Rook takes rook. Let us go to the next puzzle. Here are the threats. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. The checks are queen to g5, check. Queen to h1, check. Queen to g1, check. Queen to f1, check. Queen to d2, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is queen to g5, check. King to b1. Queen to g1, check. Knight to d1. Queen takes knight, checkmate. Another puzzle. The threats are queen takes bishop. Bishop takes knight. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using Queen takes bishop. Another puzzle. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are: queen takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The best move in puzzle position is queen to f4, queen to e6, queen takes pawn, queen to e1 check, king to g2. Next, here are the threats: rook takes knight, rook takes pawn, queen takes pawn check, rook takes knight. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn check. Solution to the puzzle is rook takes knight, rook takes rook, rook to c7. Another one. The threats are bishop takes pawn, king takes bishop, queen takes pawn, queen takes pawn. The checks are rook to d4 check, rook to e1 check, queen to e3 check, queen to d4 check, queen to e1 check. Answer to this puzzle is rook to d6, rook takes bishop, queen to d4 check, king to f5, queen takes rook. Another one. Here are the threats: knight takes pawn, pawn takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is c4, bishop takes pawn, knight to e5. Next, threats in this position are rook takes rook check. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Rook takes rook check. The puzzle is solved using king to d4, rook takes rook check, king takes rook. Next, here are the threats: queen takes pawn, queen takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The answer is rook to h3, rook to g6, knight to f4, rook takes pawn check, knight takes rook. Another one. Threats in puzzle position are bishop takes pawn, queen takes pawn, queen takes knight check, bishop takes pawn. The checks are queen to f7 check, queen takes knight check, bishop to g6 check. Answer to this puzzle is queen takes pawn, rook to b8, queen takes knight check. Another puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Queen takes queen, queen takes pawn, queen takes pawn, bishop takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The answer is queen to h4, rook to d4, knight takes rook. Another one. Here are threats in puzzle position. There are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is king to f4, king to h3, king to f3, h4, king to f2, king to g4, king to g2. Next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using h4, king to e3, h3, king to f2, pawn takes pawn. Let's continue. The threats are bishop takes pawn, queen takes knight, queen takes pawn check, rook takes pawn, rook takes knight. The checks are queen takes pawn check. Here is the solution to the puzzle: rook takes knight, pawn takes rook, queen takes pawn, rook to c2, rook to e8, queen takes rook check, bishop takes queen. One more. Here are threats in puzzle position: queen takes pawn, queen takes pawn, queen takes pawn check. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn check. Answer to this puzzle is e3, queen takes pawn, queen takes pawn check, king to h3, queen to f3. One more. Here are the threats: queen takes knight, queen takes pawn, queen takes pawn, knight takes pawn, knight takes pawn, knight takes pawn, bishop takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. Answer to this puzzle is queen takes knight, bishop takes knight, queen to e4, bishop takes bishop, queen takes rook. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.